Hello, hello, hello. We are back. This is going to be a fairly shorter one as you may be able to tell from my voice, have a cold. Um, I do have some honey and apple cider vinegar drink, which I absolutely hate, but I take it anyway. Um, and yeah, today we are looking at um, the book of Job. So this was one of the things I really loved about, and I really love about the um, chronological plan, which is you don't follow sort of the canonical arrangement of the books, you follow the history. And so we jump almost straight into Job, and it's quite a cool quite a cool intro to Job. Uh, I'll just give a brief thing. So I was reading, and this isn't in, well, actually, this might be in the Blue Letter Bible, but I was looking at one of the sort of descriptions. It's worth having a check on the Blue Letter Bible if it's there. It'll probably be one of the study. Um, oh, yeah. So this is really cool. I'm going to share my screen again. So I didn't even know this was there, but in the Blue Letter Bible, and it's worth me pointing this out. Blue Letter Bible is it's an app for Android and iOS, but not so much Mac OS or Windows. So on those, you can access it via the web, and that's how I do it. It's on the browser. You can, with certain browsers, actually create like a web app version of it. But yeah, uh, in the study tools, so I did a bit of reading on Job from here, which is the in Olive. This is sort of the paid app that I use. When I say paid, you buy the resources, so you're not paying like a subscription. Logos, which is another really popular um, Bible sort of study app, you do pay a subscription and you get like a bunch of resources. Logos is a really popular one nowadays. Um, Olive Tree, I think, is probably its main competitor. Um, and you can pay for the resources, but they very frequently have like 60, 70% sales. So it can be quite affordable. Anyway, all that to say, in the CSB apologetics, so I was actually looking at CSB Apologetics Bible, and yeah, Job. Some articles. I was reading this bit, so it's got a bunch of yeah, just a bit of an introduction to the book, and from here I was reading about how Job's author isn't necessarily known, but there are some Jewish rabbis that attribute it to Moses. There are others that attribute it to not even being written till around Solomon. There's lots of um, conjecture on the writing. The setting when Job occurred is a little bit more agreed on. It's believed he probably lived around the time of Abraham um, and Isaac. Uh, Various reasons are given for that. I've only read through this briefly, but I'm going to be making some more notes, so might be able to speak about it a bit better. But what I wanted to show you is the Blue Letter Bible has this Bible book introductions and outlines. This is under the study tools. So if you go into study tools, Bible reference, Bible book introduction outlines, and it looks like you've got a bunch from various. Oh, I'm so sorry, that's probably sounded horrible. Um, you've got a bunch from various authors. So let's go down to Job. We've got ESV Bible introductions. Okay, so I've got quite a few. So I will be going through these. But anyway, uh, in Job 1 to 5, as I was reading, a couple of things stood out to me. I'll share those and then I'll head off to bed. So Bible studies, Job 1 to 5. I had some notes. Anyway, we're introduced to this dude named Job who lived in the land of Uz, and is described as a good man. He is described as wealthy. His wealth mostly uh, accounted for in sort of livestock and servants, which is typical of that early time. It's a similar fashion in which Abraham's wealth was measured, or Lot's wealth, and indeed was the measure that gave context for the conflict between Abraham and Lot when they grew in wealth so much that they couldn't co live, and had to separate. But yeah, Job's this dude, and one thing that really stood out to me was, if I can just bring it up here. In Job 1:4, his sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send an invite, and they would blah, 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 blah. Job would send and consecrate them. For he said, it may be that my children have sinned and cursed God. The thing that stood out for me here is you've got Job literally performing sort of consecrating rituals for his children just in case. It's described as such. It's not that they have sinned, it's not that they are used to sinning. Job is literally going, in case they've sinned, let me consecrate them. And that speaks to me of a person who is super pragmatic and who sort of makes account, is diligent, makes account for, you know, how things might go right or wrong, and sort of adjust. All that to say, Job seemed to be someone that was on top of things. From this description, his wealth, his the behavior with his kids, he seemed to stay on top of things. We probably be super organized, super industrious in what he was doing. Um, Clearly, a man who feared God, and or he's described as a man who feared God and who was blameless and upright. No, I say that to say, from Job's point of view, it seemed he did the right thing, or he would always do the right thing. He would always do what was expected of him. Um, and from a casual viewer's point, they might then say, okay, well, he did the right thing and he was rich. So he was probably living a very disciplined life, doing what he needed to do, and was rich on account of that. Now let's hold that idea and then go into Satan and God's conversation. Now I did find this interesting, this whole idea of a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Does this still occur? Is this a regular occurrence? Is this like a a thing that happens regularly in heaven? I don't know. Is there something that was going on now at this point that results in this? I don't know. Anything will be conjecture. But those sort of questions stood out to me around this peculiar thing where Satan goes before God and says it. But anyway, when God points Job out to Satan, Satan then says this: Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. Sorry, now I'm making a big hoo ha about these two things, but I think there's an element of physical practicality with the things that we do. The description given of Job suggests he was probably a good businessman. He was clearly very pragmatic, clearly very proactive in his actions. All characteristics of someone who you would say, you know, casually looking at it, okay, it makes sense that this guy is rich. He's probably doing the right things physically. But Satan, probably who has an insight into the spiritual, recognizes that God is also blessing him. He's put a hedge around him, and he's blessed his the work of his hands. And that to me sort of gives an idea of um, those two things, God's blessings and our being diligent, our being proactive, probably go hand in hand. I think it's I designed a image or something. I call it prep and pray. Prepare as though everything is dependent on you, but pray because everything is dependent on God. And I think that's the sort of mentality I see presented here, where Job is probably doing what he needs to do, but in his diligence, in his excellence, God is also blessing him and has put a hedge around him and has protected him. Um, and so, like, one thing I'm taking away from that is that I should be diligent, I should be intentional, I should be pragmatic in the things that I do, I should be excellent in the things that I do, as though those were the only things that would bring me success. But know that I also should be subservient and respectful and honoring of God, because God blesses those things, or it seems God also blesses, and I would need for God to protect me and put a hedge around me and bless the work of my hands. For if I work without God blessing, then it's without vain. The watchmen that watch without God watch in vain. And so, yeah. Was there anything else that sort of stood out to me? Um, I think the only other thing is, as Satan starts to attack Job, first his possessions and then his physicality, that's where we are now. Job is able to clearly express how he's feeling. He's able to clearly express his distress, his depression, his pain. In chapter 3, he goes as far as to sort of curse the day that he's born. He is, and understandably, I mean, the description given of what he's going through is that he's suffering. I think there's a misconception sometimes that I see where we're supposed to or expected to suffer in silence as Christians, as though that presents some higher form of piousness or holiness, that you would suffer and not be able to acknowledge the pain and the suffering that you're going through. But Job very much does so, um, and in doing so is remains steadfast, remains on as he still doesn't sin, even in complaining and expressing his pain. And we see David do similar. David is able to, in the Psalms, and we'll get there, is able to express deep anguish and pain without that being considered wrong. And I think it speaks to God being one that's open to us bringing such before him, as any good father would be. The other thing, again, when his friends initially come and they just sit with him, I found that comforting, that they they offered only their presence as some sort of comfort without needing to immediately speak to what was going on now, albeit they eventually do and don't necessarily help the situation. But I think there's a lesson to be learned there of being willing to sometimes just hold space for someone and be there for someone um, in just presence without needing to solutionize or have to speak. Which I think in our modern day society we're almost scared of silence. Um, yeah. Eliphaz, who first responds to Job's cries um, in chapter 4 and 5, speaks to what under normal circumstances will be typically true. He says, his outlook from his speech seems to be, if you did good, you would be blessed. When you did good, you were blessed. You must have done something wrong to result in this, misfortune. Confess it. Um, Now he does at some point present as though he says, "Oh, this came to me in the night," and he presents what essentially is common sense, right? He presents as though he's received some secret revelation of the Lord, and uses that to somewhat bolster his argument, as though it was more, um, it was more than just the obvious. I think we sometimes fall victim to this, where we might just be saying something normal or commonplace, or even we might be taking something meant for us and trying to make it seem larger than what it is with some of these platitudes or claims, to something supernatural going on. Whereas it's just obvious. But then also, it was a lie because if he had consulted God, he would know these were from God, um, for reasons that God Himself will reveal later, or rather, show are not necessary later. But yeah, uh, that was 1 to 5. Yeah, and so Pastor Lyons pointed out that yeah, yeah, the enemy who rightly is, as Pastor Lyon mentioned in the comments, called the accuser, will always put us, will be ready to do the same with us, to accuse us and bring us forth. And unfortunately, the devil actually often has good reason to, by some of our actions and thoughts. With Job, he actually didn't. With Job, Job was innocent and blameless, and the accuser still found reason to come to accuse Job. How much more us? And we are in the exact same position where the enemy will always find reason to accuse us. So yeah, cool. I think on account of my medicine getting finished and feeling still quite rough, I'm gonna call it an early night. But thank you for joining. Thank you, Pastor Lyle, for all the comments. And whenever you watch this, I hope you are encouraged to get into the Word. Every single day, let's spend a little bit of time just looking through, the things that we would pick from it, and the thing God will speak to us through it will be amazing. So, thank you, and good night.